the XARM that you were involved with, which for anyone that doesn't know, it was like a fighting arm wrestling type of thing. What happened with that?
I got a call from a friend of mine named Russell Naftal, who was, I think, working at the time with the people who did the Muppets. And he said, I got a friend of mine who's up in Seattle, and they're having lunch one day. They're a production company. They do commercials for Starbucks, for Microsoft up there in Washington, Seattle. He said they're having lunch one day, and they started to fool around about arm wrestling. And one of the guys at the table said, "Hey, what about if we were arm wrestling and I reached across and smacked you with a left hook?" So they started to laugh about it, and they started to think about it. So they called this guy, Russell Naftal, up that I knew, and they said, "We wanted to come up with a new idea for a sport, a fighting sport, and we think we have it." So they said, "Can you help us?" He said, "Well, I can introduce you to two guys." He said, "One guy is Hulk Hogan." He said, "If you want to make it a spectacle," he said, "Hogan might be the guy because he comes from the wrestling world." And he said, "If you've got a wacky idea," and they had described it in, I guess, a couple of sentences to him, and sounded nuts, cross between arm wrestling and hitting. He said, "The other guy that I can introduce you to, if you want to make it into a sport, is Art Davie." And that's what happened. They decided they wanted to make it into a sport. They called me up, they flew down, they wrote me a check, and I wound up hiring Ted Williams over at Gladiator Challenge to be my assistant. And he was the one, between he and I, we came up with the rules, and we wound up designing a 28-inch by 16-inch table and built it on a giant platform. And with the funding from the Piranha Group, Piranha Production Company in Seattle, that's how we got going. We eventually got funding from a number of websites. We got funding from a big group in Holland that was involved in entertainment. But I eventually came to the people in cable TV, and they looked at it and they said, "You know something? This is not as good as the UFC, because the UFC, you were drawing on the fact that there's a lot of high school and college wrestlers, that every strip mall has a karate or a taekwondo school. So there's a huge feeder system." He said, "You're doing something with XARM where you're actually having to bring fighters into a workshop and train them to do this." He said, there's not much legs on this. So I could never get anybody in cable that really wanted to write me a check. After 4 years, we eventually pulled the plug.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.